world gets ready to go public. Sega does what Nintendon't. And the world gets its first look at the GameCube. These stories and many more on this month's episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm your host, Carl, and as always, my co-host, Peter, is here. Say hi, Peter.
Well, technically, I'm not there. Anyhow, hi.
This is very true. Okay, for those listening in the deep, deep future, this is still pandemic times. And hopefully it's already over by the time you're listening to this at some point in the deep, deep future. Okay, as always, we are here to talk about the biggest stories in and around the video game industry going back 20, 30, and 40 years. That means for this month, October of 1980, October of 1990, and October of 2000. But first, obligatory banter. Peter, how are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good. I'm on vacation right now. I'm at the Baltic Sea, and I'm enjoying a week of work. So, can't complain.
What do you mean by a week of work? I thought you were on vacation.
A week off? Work.
Off of work. Off
Yes.
of work. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm enjoying my last week before I have to go back to educating the future.
All right.
Something or others.
Those guys who have half a year off of work. Right. I almost forgot.
Hey. There's a lot that happens between semesters, I think.
True.
No. I've been very, very busy. And, of course, we're recording this on the 27th of October of the year 2020. And this will be going live on November 1st because we've unfortunately exhausted the megabytes available this month thanks to our interview with Ken Williams. If you haven't listened to that already, it's quite a good listen. It talks about the history of running Sierra with us, and also our special episode with Ethan of the history of how we play, where we went deep dived into the AMOA 1980 show. That's the arcade trade show where basically the modern video game industry as we know it was born, with big players in pinballs moving into the video game area, the Japanese companies really for the first time starting to push their own games and not just licensing them, and classic machines like Defender and Pac-Man and Battlezone all being premiered at the show. So really, really good one if you guys want to learn about that pivotal moment. But because of them, we didn't have enough megabytes left in our account for this episode. So I guess this is the time when we plug the Patreon.
Plug the Patreon. Yes. Yes, please. Yes, please. We need money urgently because we know much more content than we already are delivering. So
yes.
And us.
Yeah, I mean, we've reached our original goal of $10 a month. I've actually been paying $15 a month for our account for a very, very long time in order to be able to get as many episodes and interviews up as I could. And if you do join Patreon for as little as $1 a month, we have not one, but 2 interviews up right now. One with Tom Dusenberry, a longtime veteran of the toy industry and founder of Hasbro Interactive, and also an interview with Jerry Wolosenko, who was one of the very earliest distributors of computer software, computer games especially, and later on, was involved with a ton of other companies, including Harmonix. So definitely check those out, and we will have another interview probably going up the first week of November that will also be an exclusive to Patreon until we have enough room in the schedule to upload it to the general feed with Tom Dusenberry, one of the, not founders, but one of the early people at Infocom who basically created the whole Zork News Times, and later on had a very storied career, also Harmonix and a bunch of other companies. So his story is a fascinating one too. I've been editing it. Ended up being like a 5.5 hour interview. It's probably going to come in at like 3.5, 4 hours. I might have to break it up into 2 episodes like I did with Don Daglow and Michael Katz's interviews. But that's just the tip of the iceberg of the many things that you'll get if you join our Patreon. Well, it's actually pretty much all of it. But hey, you also get a chance to, send us an email, which you can also do just by sending us an email to the very convenient, Peter, what is our email address?
Dude, I can't remember it for the hell of it.
It is, and you'll find this in the show notes, Video Game Newsroom Time Machine at gmail.com. Or you could also find us on Twitter at Video Game News R2, and we're also on Instagram. Any of those will get you into our social media graces. You can send us comments, corrections, just love letters, whatever you want. You just send it to us via those links.
You see, this is the problem when you save all the stuff in your computer. It's like with the numbers in your phone, you just can't remember any of them anymore. So whenever I'm up there, I need to borrow a phone. Hey, can I borrow your phone and call someone for an emergency call? Yes, sure. Yes, my phone. So who do you want to call? I don't know.
And this is why you keep a lot of the stuff on a Google account. So no matter where you are, you can still access it. Probably not the best for security purposes, but yeah. Okay, so we've got a ton of stuff to talk about this month. But before we can take that trip down memory lane, well, memories for some of us who remember it. Damn kids. Okay, we first need to look at the blunders. Our, as I'm so calling it, Department of Corrections. Ethan has decided it's not the Department of Corrections. We'll work this out at some point. But let's check in with Ethan for this month's, or better said, last month's corrections.
And here we are. Ethan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
And
last time, I take it?
Oh, never. It keeps me humble from my place of otherwise divine perfection, or something vaguely similar. Yeah. Okay. What did I get wrong last month? Hit me.
Well, welcome back to the Department of Redundancy Department, and we are going to explain Carl's many errors, as usual.
Usual.
Well, first off the bat, I must take umbrage with your pronunciation of the company Taito. You said you went Taito, and you said you didn't know how to pronounce it. And I can tell you in both Japanese and in English, it's Taito.
Okay, Taito. I will endeavor to get that correct in the future.
Okay. Then, when you were talking about Sunsoft, you were saying basically it was a company that no longer exists anymore. But the company that was Sunsoft does still exist. It's called Sundenshi. Sunsoft was a label of Sundenshi that they used for their arcade games and then later home games and whatnot. So the company that was Sunsoft still exists.
Ah, okay. Good good to know. Yeah, so Sundenchi predates Sunsoft?
Yeah, I mean, Sunsoft was a label of Sundenchi.
Okay. And what does Sundenchi normally do? What was their original?
They're a general electronics firm. And in fact, if you follow History of Sunsoft, who's run by Stefan Ganser, who's part of Gaming Alexandria, you can see some of the stuff that they did. I think one of his latest tweets is about a coffee maker that they made. So they made stuff like that, home appliances, just electronics.
Okay. Interesting. And yes, of course, Sunsoft has a very long and storied career as a game developer, especially with licenses. But that's another story for another time. Okay. Then we have something else.
Yeah, and this one comes from Stefan, right?
Exactly. And I've talked to him several times already about other issues concerning Sunsoft and other things. But yes, the Stratovox. We talked about this in the episode. This was the first arcade game with speech. And
first video game.
First video game. You're correct. There were pinball games before that. But the first video game with speech, and unfortunately, I couldn't understand what they were saying. I ran the game myself through MAME, didn't understand what was going on. Watched video of it online, couldn't understand what was going on. And he pointed out quite correctly that the emulation of that sound chip is imperfect. And if you watch video, and we'll put the link in the show notes, video of the actual arcade cabinet running, the speech is actually very, very clear and in English.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure because Stefan had written about this beforehand when he used to have his History of Sunsoft stuff up in articles. And I couldn't remember exactly what the situation was between the English and Japanese version. But there is a Japanese version that uses Japanese phrases. But in English, they did translate it to help me.
Yes, and there's I think 3 or 4 phrases in the game, so it is quite impressive, especially for the time.
Yeah, and that the full story of that will probably be forthcoming in whatever form he's going to publish his research. It's a pretty fun story.
Oh, definitely. I mean. Yeah, he actually shared with me one of his interviews. It was actually a fun thing to listen to. So, but okay. Moving on, we've got plenty of other little tidbits still to cover.
Yeah. When you were talking about Defender, you talked about how Williams was a long time in the gambling industry, but they hadn't really done gambling games. They started, I think, to do it in a little bit in the late 1970s, but then in the 80s, they started to ramp that up, and then that's what WMS became. But really, Williams was a strictly game company, and very specifically, the founder, Harry Williams, did not want to do gambling stuff.
Ah, okay. I must have gotten them mixed up with Bally then when I was talking.
Yeah, Bally was never shy about the gambling connection. But Williams did not do straight gambling games.
Gotcha. Yeah, Bally, during this entire period, I keep running into articles about Bally trying to open up their own casinos and getting licenses. And there's a whole additional saga going on in the background with Bally at this point, getting into casino operation. Which
Williams is going to basically go the same route with less disastrous results in a way. Both the companies are gone now, but in a sense, Williams was more successful in following that track. But there's a lot of strange things that happen in the story of Bally that are not at all relevant to video games after they get out of that. So you probably won't get to the end of that story.
Not quite. No, it was a conscious decision on my part not to follow the Bally gambling a storyline, just because when I started to scratch the surface of it, I realized just how deep it went, and it unfortunately just would have become too big of a distraction in the 40-year jump in the show.
Yeah, if someone wants to do the gambling game Newsroom Time Machine, then go right ahead.
And it is interesting. I keep running across stories, especially in Germany, where there's a company called Löwen something.
Automatic.
Exactly. And they are a major player. They also, for a while, become one of the major importers of arcade games, even though they don't stick with it for very long, just because the violence issues and the fact that the gambling parlors in Germany are so widespread and they're not accessible to people under 18. It just becomes too much of a headache for them. And at some point, if I find a really good on-point news article about it, I might do a quick retrospective of their involvement in the industry. But again, it's one of those things where they keep popping up in my research, but at the same time, they're not significant enough to turn into a story, or they would just distract from the more important stories each month.
Yeah, definitely at some point got to get with you on trying to track down some of those people from Löwen, because I really don't know much about their story.
Oh, I haven't tried to track down Löwen. There's a couple of other importers and manufacturers here in Germany that I have been trying to track down, but it's far more difficult than in the States because you do have more restricted use of the internet over here. A lot of people just aren't advertising their presence, and anybody who's in this field will know that tracking people down and getting responses from them isn't always easy. There's a German guy who was involved with some shady dealings in Canada years ago, who was running arcade parlors and is now some multi-millionaire in real estate investor based out of the Bahamas. And I tried to contact him to get some ideas, and of course, never heard back. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that just happens. So hopefully someday we will be able to do that.
Yeah, there's a cool regional German history that I hope you can touch on at some point. Anyways, back to the corrections part of this. This next one is not something that was your fault. But when you talked about this creative computing article that talked about 3 machines that came out in 1977, the Bally Professional Arcade, the Video Brain,
also ran trilogy.
Yeah. And
Trinity.
Right. And I forget the other one. But the Bally Professional Arcade did not come out in 1977. It was supposed to, but it got delayed due to FCC stuff and all that. I mean, the Bally Professional Arcade is one of these very interesting stories that barely anybody knows about, but I'm not going to get too far on that. When you come back around to this in 2027, then we'll talk a bit about that, I think. But building off of that, you also said that the Trinity that we traditionally think of was introduced all at the same show. Like you said, introduced all at the same CES show, and that's not true. It's kind of complicated depending on when you say something came out, because there's, shipping difficulties and all that, and especially the Commodore PET. The general accepted wisdom is that it was first shown in January 1977 and didn't start getting out there until mid to late 1977. And Apple was introduced at the West Coast Computer Fair, April 1977, and the TRS-80 was first introduced at a particular show in August 1977. But then it depends on how you weigh things in terms of when they came out. But they weren't debuted altogether. In fact, the TRS-80 just generally never went to shows because Radio Shack had their own thing. They didn't have to.
True. Yeah, they didn't have to find retailers to stock it because they were the retailer.
Right.
Okay.
And also building off of that, one thing that should be noted is that this idea of the Trinity was not at all established in 1980. In fact, the earliest reference that we've been able to find to the Trinity is 1995.
Really?
Yeah. This is something Dale, who was on your podcast, Quarter Past, was looking into. And that's where his trail ended out. We haven't done a comprehensive search of all the computer magazines to find out where this idea of the Trinity came from. But, it's fine for you to refer to that. Following on from this, there's another magazine quasi-error that comes up. When you were talking about Computer Quarterback, which was created by Danny Bunch-and-Berry in 1980, the magazine that you're talking about describes it as a real-time game. And that is like how it was advertised, but it's not really real-time. It's kind of like Temple of Apshai, which runs on a ticking clock that will move forward if you don't make your move. But there are you don't directly control your character on the screen in that same way. It's like a lot of football games. You set up plays and then you kind of watch them go forward and you kind of influence things, but it's not real time in the way that we would exactly think of it.
This is true. And this was something that I actually didn't see until a little bit later when I spent a little bit of time watching the videos. I guess by comparison with all the other products that were available at the time, it would have seemed real time just because of that ticking clock, which was the great innovation of the program. But you are correct. By our modern standards, it is definitely not real time.
Yeah.
This Madden is not.
Yeah, and of course, Danny Bunch-and-Berry would become one of the pioneers of real time, like with her later games, Cytron Masters, Mule, Modem Wars. She does a lot of amazing things for the real time genre, but Computer Quarterback is just not quite an action game in a way.
No. It's also published by SSI. I mean, it's not like they were super famous for their action games, even at this point. They will do some, but it's not going to be their main driver. Right.
And then one final one for the 1980s. You mentioned, I can't remember what year exactly you said, but you couldn't figure out the year that Atari sold to Warner. And that year was 1976.
Yes, and I should know this. I normally know this, and if I said any other date, I profusely apologize. Because 1976 is also the year I was born. I mean, I should know this.
You have a spiritual connection with the Warner fan. I like to think that I have a spiritual connection with Doom because it came out when I was 4 days old.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can see the disparity here. Anyways.
Slight age difference. Just a slight age difference.
And then we have one to add in to the extra episode that I was on. A small explanation of a concept that I kind of whizzed by really quick.
Yes, and this comes from one of the Patreons of the show. Well, Ethan is also a patron of the show, as all of our listeners should be. And from Lawrence de Bruggen, and I'm killing the pronunciation of that, no doubt. But he wanted to make sure that we clarified a little bit of terminology. When we talked about pinball technology, there's three phrases that probably need to be clarified. One is mechanical systems, the other is electromechanical systems, and then there's the solid state systems or solid state electronics. And just in a brief nutshell, and I'll actually put Lawrence's text in the show notes here, but mechanical systems are where you have real physical force making the changes. So you push a button, something, and you're literally causing air pressure or whatever to force something else to change. Little numbers switching over or whatever. The electromechanical is where you're using electricity to perform the physical mechanical changes. So electric motors and things like that. And old-fashioned relays. And then finally, when we get to solid state, is where you're doing a lot of the cause and effect through everything from transistors, diodes, FETs, integrated circuits, vacuum tubes in the old days. But you are creating essentially circuit-based logic to keep track of what's going on. And we may have used the mechanical and electromechanical almost without a transfer, even though by the time we get to the AMOA 1980, it's really not an issue of doing mechanical pinball anymore. You're talking about electromechanical at that point. And solid state has pretty much pushed all the electromechanical out of the market at that point.
Yeah, and the way that I described it in the episode was instead of gears, wires. So the way that you it's all about energy transfer, basically. And the different ways that you can instill energy in something. If you're trying to turn a wheel, there's ways you can do that. You can have a lever that can turn a wheel. You can have a button that spins a motor to turn a wheel. Or you can have an in-between to that motor that is strictly digital, rather than having to move parts in order to get the electric generation to work. So, a battery in that sense rather than a chip. So, I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that really is earth-changing, and it's hard to even imagine a time before we had the solid-state technology permeate every aspect of our lives.
Well, I can tell you that something that I'm working on now will describe some of what the mechanical age of arcades looked like. I'm not sure if I can shill on here, but you can follow me.
Shill away.
Documentary called Arcade Dreams, which is now on Kickstarter. I'm involved with that as a researcher and a writer, and they have filmed a huge number of not only video games but also mechanical and electromechanical games. The cinematography is wonderful. If you want to check it out, Arcade Dreams.
Arcade Dreams, excellent. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to be of service.
All right. A couple more corrections to round us out as we go in the 90s and the 2000s.
Of course.
There's a point where you were talking about handheld systems, and you mentioned that the Tiger was DOA in your phrase. And I realized later what you meant by that was the Gamecom, which was a huge, colossal failure. But Tiger Electronics as a company was successful. We look back on their piddly little LCD handhelds today and how they didn't have any real good play value. But it's the funny thing where, like, even if you owned a Game Boy, you probably owned a couple Tiger games too, even though you could have bought a cartridge for that. It's a weird thing. I don't quite understand what the huge appeal was. But Tiger was a successful company pretty much up until they did the Gamecom.
Yes. And I did mean, I believe the context was we were talking about cartridge-based systems because it was the whole idea of SNK closing down their U.S. operations.
Yes, that was it.
Yeah, and the fact that you had the Gamecom, you had the Wonder Swan, which was not going to get U.S. distribution, even though they did have a contract with a company to bring it over. And so it was everybody was getting in, trying to figure out a way to compete. And it just wasn't going to happen. The Game Boy was just too strong of a juggernaut. But yes, as somebody who did own one Tiger Electronics game, I can say that most of them were garbage.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I did own, however, I spent an inordinate amount of time on, and you can actually play a simulation of it on archive.org. They have a version of it, and it's Tiger's adaptation of Gauntlet. And it's actually an update of the old, I want to say 79 or 80 handheld Mattel Electronics Dungeons and Dragons, which actually
I think that was 1982.
It could be a little bit later, yeah. I know they also reskinned it later on as a He-Man game. But it actually had you move through a dungeon, and you were constantly moving through the dungeon with traps and everything else and picking up treasure. And the Tiger Gauntlet game, completely different perspective to the arcade, a sort of pseudo 3D off into the distance perspective, and you're looking for the door and you keep moving through, and of course your health is going down as you're moving, and you've got monsters attacking, and you can be either a Valkyrie or the warrior. I gotta say that actually kept me entertained for a very, very long time. But I'll put a link to the show notes to it.
Right.
Okay.
Then following that, you were talking about something about distribution, and so you mentioned digital distribution, and you said you believed at that time, which was in 2000, that Steam existed, but it was only Valve games. But Steam was not even like a glimmer in anybody's eye at that point. I think they first beta tested in 2002, and then it debuted in 2004 with Half-Life 2.
Okay.
And Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines.
Okay. I couldn't remember if they had already used it for downloading DLC and mods of Half-Life 1.
Nah, I mean, in part, the reason that they created Steam is they wanted to push patches for stuff like Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
They didn't really have a way to do it at that point.
Gotcha. Well, I knew it came out of the mods for Half-Life 1. I just couldn't remember exactly what the context was for it. And so, okay, cool. 2002 with Half-Life 2 makes a lot of sense.
2004.
2004.
The commercial release. The alpha and beta tests were in 2002. There's a couple screenshots that exist of the early versions of Steam.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, 2004. I was off by a long shot.
Then you discussed IDOS, or IDOS, whichever you want to talk about. And you used the phrase derived from Domark. And even though Domark was a big part of what became IDOS, it was not really derived from it in that way. It's complicated exactly, but the bigger part of IDOS was really US Gold. And US Gold is the one that brought core design into the thing, and Tomb Raider and all that. So US Gold was a bigger part of IDOS than Domark.
Gotcha. Okay, and that makes a lot more sense, actually. Yeah, for whatever reason, the Wikipedia entry puts a lot of emphasis on the Domark connection, and I'm not sure if that had to do with the ownership, because I've got a whole digital book on the history of US Gold on my computer. I'm going to have to look back on it. But I know US Gold hit some really, really hard times before this period.
But they still had this huge distribution structure, and they owned all these studios like Core Design and whatnot. So I would say that on a substantial whole, US Gold was bigger than Domark. Domark was kind of the basis for the game acquisition stuff that they were doing. And, I'm pretty sure like Ian Livingstone probably owned some stock in the company and whatnot. But derived from Domark doesn't seem like an accurate description, either way you slice it.
No problem. No, and I am not defending it. I buy into it 100%.
Okay. And the last thing, where you're talking about the death of Probe Software, you did say that Probe Software did the SNES port of Mortal Kombat, but that that was Sculptured Software over in Utah.
Yes, and Probe Software did the 68,000 ports of the Genesis and the Amiga, as well as the handheld, the Game Gear and the Game Boy versions, the Sega Master System version, which only came out in Europe. And they may have been involved with another one, but I'm not sure. But so the Super NES one, the reason why it didn't play nearly as well, blood aside, is Probe Software didn't program it.
Just don't say that too loud. There's some people who really, really revere Sculptured.
I'm not saying that Sculptured didn't make good software. I'm just saying this was a bit of a misfire. There's just no real way to put it nicely that version of the game kind of blows. Just saying.
Fair.
And I'm this is coming from the guy who played the one button version on the Amiga. Okay, so.
Oh, that sounds like horror. Anyways,
you haven't played Mortal Kombat until you've played it with one button. That's all I have to say.
Beautiful. This is a real hardcore gamer we got right here. Anyways,
hell yeah.
I think we're done. So back to your regularly scheduled program.
Thank you, Ethan, as always, keeping us honest.
So I think we're pretty happy to have Ethan.
Yes, Ethan. Ethan's been the one collecting the corrections for quite a while anyway. And so even though we were reading them, it was really Ethan's list of corrections. And he really knows his stuff. I do recommend everybody subscribe to him on Twitter. We actually started working on some additional research projects based out of Germany. There's some stuff that, we just talked about in the corrections, some stuff that we may be able to shed some light on now that the German sources may actually be accessible. So I started working on that. It's going to be a while before we can really do it because I'm going to have to go to the National Library in Leipzig. But I do think that we're going to be able to do something. That might actually be a fun little trip for you and me at some point to go out there and go through old magazines and stuff.
Again.
But we still have much to do, so let's turn on the time machine and go back to October of 1980.
The interest in electronic games apparently is personal computers that can swallow a book. 1980. Games people play.
Welcome to October of 1980. Peter, what's our first story?
Our first story of 1980, Apple is getting ready to go public.
Wall Street is ready for Woz and Jobs. The $25 million IPO is hotly anticipated with not one, but two Wall Street firms handling the deal, Morgan Stanley and Hambrecht & Quist. While the cash infusion will no doubt help with their massive expansion, it is also coming as the increase in their workforce. and the connected increase in outstanding stock options is going to force them to start to report figures to the SEC, no matter if they go public or not. So they might as well get some of that sweet, sweet investor capital. The stock would go public on December 12th for $22 a share. Adjusted for splits, that would be a current price of 39 cents a share.
Anyone who was invested at the stock market back at this time and did not buy Apple is surely crying right now.
Yes and no. You have to remember that Apple is going to have some serious downward spirals over the years. Don't forget that 1980 is really as good as Apple's going to get for a very long time. The Lisa is just about to hit, which is going to be a tremendous flop. The Macintosh is literally going to lose money for the first almost decade of its existence. They're going to go into the 90s just keeping the Apple II from 1977 on life support through new modifications and stuff. So,
and also up to 2005, the stock value didn't really move that much. Didn't really go up.
No, I mean, they had several splits and even one or two like 5-to-1 splits and stuff over the years. And the stock will be a high flyer for a short while. It's just that it doesn't really take off until Jobs comes back and launches the iPod.
Yes.
Okay, that's really when Apple becomes the major player it is today. But yes, if you did buy it back then and held on to it, you're sitting quite pretty today.
Oh, yeah. So I'm not too firm regarding the history of well, not of Apple, but of the Apple stock. But even before being a public company, they were a stock company.
Well, okay, they're a corporation, which means that there are stakeholders, there are stockholders. It's just that you couldn't publicly trade the stock until the IPO. So if you did have stock, you couldn't just go out and say, hey, investors, buy and sell this stock randomly. The idea here is that as long as the number of investors remains at a very low level, and I am not a super well-versed person when it comes to the laws around the thresholds for IPOs, especially the way they existed 40 years ago, but they are running into a problem here. A closely held company is allowed to have a specific number of stockholders. Once you go beyond that limit of stockholders, you are essentially a publicly traded company because, well, there's too many people who own stock.
Yep. And
so this is their problem, that they've been promising the employees these stock options. So they've earmarked stock for these people, which means these people have an interest in the stock. So even though they don't own the stock yet, because they have an interest in the stock and the stocks have been earmarked for them, the SEC is saying, hey, you're going to have to start reporting publicly. You're going to have to be issuing these reports of, how much you're selling, how much your costs are, what are your prognosis for the future, what's your market analysis. And all of this information, this internal information, is very valuable and can actually give your competitors an edge if they know what you're doing. But it's required for you to be able to publicly sell the stock, which is a great way to bring money into the company for future investment, and also to buy and sell other companies, something that Ken Williams actually explained very well in our interview, and he does really well in the book he just released. So I highly recommend, if you guys are interested in that aspect of the business, how is it that these companies are buying up developers right and left, and it's basically all stock deals, how that actually works, he goes into in the book, and I get even more details in the interview about it. So there's a lot of stuff that a company can do once they've gone public. There's a lot of stuff that they have to do that they don't want to do once they've gone public. And so here they were running into the worst case scenario where they're going to be forced to do all that. But at the same time, because they haven't done the IPO, they can't raise money through the sale of stock. So, this is where they have just decided, okay, we have to pull the trigger. We have to do it now. And they're going to raise $25 million, which you'd have to multiply that by about 3 to get the modern value. And for a company that is very, very niche in a very, very niche market, this is not a bad payday.
No, not at all.
No.
Not at all. Hmm.
Yes. And speaking of companies that have had IPOs.
Yes, Commodore facing scrutiny.
Commodore International Limited has seen its stock soar higher and higher, something that the Securities and Exchange Commission has taken note of. The stock, which rose from an adjusted 7/8 to over $90 in just 5 years, is one of the New York Stock Exchange's high flyers. With the company refocusing its efforts on the U.S. market with the launch of a new line of low-cost digital cash registers and the VIC-20 color home computer, the sky looks to be the limit. So first off, do you know what they mean by 7/8?
Not really.
Excellent. I guess you've never seen Trading Places or the movie Wall Street?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Also, I'm not too well familiar with the special lingo of this American stock market.
Okay. Well, it's no longer the lingo of the American stock market, but for the first, I think, 150, almost 200 years of the New York Stock Exchange, and somebody can look this up on Wikipedia really fast and correct me, they used a percentage system instead of a decimal cent system to show the prices of stocks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this goes all the way back to the times when the international currency du jour wasn't the dollar, but Spanish doubloons. And because doubloons were gold coins, you would basically cut them into pieces in order to make change. And this stuck in the system. So if you're watching any movie that deals with the stock market up until the 1990s, or Wolf of Wall Street, the movie from a few years ago with Leonardo DiCaprio, it also plays in the 80s. All the stock tickers are showing percentages. So 7/8 means that this was 7/8 of a dollar. So we're talking less than $1 a share. So this was, even by then standards with inflation and everything, this was a very cheap stock 5 years ago in 1975.
Yes.
And that had a lot to do with the fact that the calculator market collapsed and stuff. But the fact that it's now a $90 a share stock, that's a huge jump.
Oh, yes. Jesus.
And
so when did Commodore International Limited go broke then?
Well, Commodore doesn't actually collapse until 1990. And again, somebody's going to correct me on this. I want to say they collapsed officially in 1995, but it may have been 94.
Mm-hmm. Well, asking the combined knowledge of the entire internet using an well-known online encyclopedia, 1994.
Okay, see, I got it right, 94. I wasn't sure if they managed to somehow scrounge their way through to 95, but yeah, 94 sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah. And we do have to be clear here that Jack Tramiel was not new to the idea of stock scams and artificially inflated valuations. He had actually gone through this. The company was originally founded in Canada. He had gone through this once in Canada already and ended up causing a major bank to fail there because of his thing. And somehow Commodore got through that almost unscathed. And I started digging into this story. The SEC investigation isn't going to lead to anything, but one of the big Wall Street guys who's sort of been pushing the Commodore stock and a few other tech stocks at this point had previously been involved also in a stock manipulation scandal. And so there's this. I started doing a deep dive on this. I was getting really, really deep into this whole history, and I decided, okay, I've had enough. All we need to know here is the Commodore PET at this point is the also-ran of the Trinity. The Trash 80 is by far the most successful of the three computers. The Apple II, as we've talked about, is really making inroads as an educational tool. And the Commodore PET doesn't have the graphics, doesn't have the distribution channel. It's kind of the also-ran. This is about to turn around with the VIC-20. Yeah. But for right now, they're the also-ran. There's no justification for this stock price.
Yeah. And this is why I ask usually when a stock explodes in just such a short time span, something usually is fishy.
Oh, definitely. And as much as I'd like to interview one of the Tramiels, if the Tramiels are involved, it's fishy. It's just, it's Jack. So, yeah. But you know what? This stock price is one of the things that's going to help him, get the VIC-20 off the ground. The VIC-20 is going to lead to the Commodore 64, and that's not a bet. So,
no.
Okay. In other moves by big companies.
In other news, Hayden Book Company buys Programmer International.
One of the earliest publishers of software for the Apple II, David Gordon's Programma, has been bought by Hayden Book Company. The book publisher that has released a line of books on programming will continue to operate Programma as a separate software publishing entity, but enhance it through its existing distribution channels. That's what the press release says. The reality is that Programma was financially broke, had little to no quality control of its releases, and Dave Gordon would be fired shortly after the acquisition. He would go on to found a new publisher, Datammost, the next year. I'm guessing Programma isn't a company you've come across before.
No, not really.
Yeah. They really only existed on the Apple II. Now, if you were an Apple II user around this time, they are a thing of legend. John Romero, for example, he attributes a lot of his early knowledge and understanding to stuff done by Programma.
Okay.
So they were very important. The only problem is that David Gordon basically published anything that came through the door. So if you were buying a Programma title, it may be a really awesome, innovative program, or it may be an utter hunk of junk that's going to be constantly crashing. You had no idea.
Ha! It's like a Kinder egg.
Yeah, only with a slightly lower choking hazard element. But yeah, the more important thing here is the fact that it's a book publisher that's buying them. And we talked about this, I believe, last year, where there was that article in the New York Times about how software publishing may be the new area for traditional book publishers.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of movement of book publishers and other existing media publishing companies looking at the software industry, looking at this booming home computer market as something that they have to get in on. Yeah. And so this is not going to be the last time that we see a book publisher trying to play in this field. And most of them are going to fail.
Right, because they don't know what they're buying.
Well, they don't know what they're buying. They don't understand this market. They don't have the expertise necessary to really understand it. And unlike books, the window of opportunity for software is not going to be as long. Exactly. It's not like you can, keep selling the same book for 50 years once you have a hit.
Yeah.
And I think that they just don't understand it. And on top of that, their existing retail outlets, and Hayden makes a big deal about this in their press release, that, we can use our regional distributors to get this out there. Well, these are guys who are used to dealing with bookstores.
Exactly.
Well, their connections are useless if you now have to talk to software stores, mom and pop computer shops, because they have to introduce themselves to these people. They have to learn the lingo. I mean, the idea that they're thinking, we've got salespeople out in Tucson, Arizona. Congratulations, you have a salesperson for books in Tucson, Arizona. What's that going to do about software?
Exactly.
So it's and Gordon's Data Most is going to be around for a little while as well, but he's never really going to solve that quality control problem that he has. But a lot of the people who did release software for both Programma and DataMost, and there's a lot of crossover. A lot of people just go from Programma directly over to DataMost. They will do some big things. There's quite a few people who go from there onto arcade game development and all sorts of stuff. So it's one of those early testing grounds for the software industry.
I'm just wondering why book companies try to get into other markets than their core market. I mean, of course, in order to stay relevant, nobody buys books anymore. Yada yada yada. But
well, if you listen to the Don Daglow interview, he started out basically as a wannabe writer. He wanted to write for the theater. And when he was introduced to computers and he started playing Colossal Cave Adventure, and he realizes what I'm really looking at here is interactive literature. What's the point of being a writer of traditional linear text? This is the future. And there's a lot of people at this point who are looking at these adventure games, the Scott Adams stuff there, who are looking at the very early beginnings of online networks. We've talked about the few that are now emerging where people can connect and get data and share information and everything else. And they're looking at this going, is the book even going to be relevant? What happens to the encyclopedia in the future? What happens to the dictionary in the future? What happens to the novel? Does it have a future? And we know that some of those publishing areas have died. Nobody buys an encyclopedia for their kid anymore.
No.
How many people are still using a physical dictionary? Very, very few. So certain types of publishing have in fact died. Now, obviously, they jumped the gun by 25, 30 years. But the people who are looking at this and understand how big this could be are trying to get ahead of the game. It's just the technology isn't there yet. The networks aren't there yet. It's the advertising of the home computer industry is selling an image of the computer that won't be realized until the mid to late 90s. It's all just 15 years too.
Some internet for all of those services.
Exactly. The internet is going to be the big deal maker. It's going to be the game changer. And until the internet gets opened up and you're off of the network and you can access it for cheap and you have a computer that can actually make use of it, all of those factors have to come together. The modem technology has to be there. The regulations allowing for internet access have to be there. The compression algorithms necessary for JPEG and GIF, as well as the processing power to do that, all has to be present. And then you have to have a hard drive so you can store this stuff so you don't have to recall it from the website every time. And those are just a lot of factors that have to coexist and come together at a price point that makes this all possible. And it's really, I'd say 1995, 96, that this truly becomes possible.
True that.
Yeah. Oh, well.
All right. Moving on. Stern Electronics is getting a running start in video games.
Pinball has been facing mounting competition from video games and arcades everywhere, and more pinball manufacturers are entering the video game field. Stern is the latest with Astro Invader, a licensed game from a Japanese manufacturer from whom they are buying the boards. This will give them, according to Stern's president of the amusement division, Stephen Kaufman, a fast start in an ever more competitive field. They plan on releasing more licensed games as well as making their own titles. The first and by far most important one they would show off at the AMOA show, Berserk.
And really call it Astro Invader.
It's a game called Astro Invader. Yes. And
2 years after Space Invader.
At this point, people are still making money off of Space Invader clones. And a lot of the games out there are just slight variations or adding slight changes. Remember, we talked not too long ago about Galaxian.
Yeah.
Galaxian or Galaga. I never get the order of those two right, which one came first and which came second. One is a sequel to the other. But whatever the case may be, even though, you get the stars moving in the background, it's supposed to be a ship flying through space, it's essentially still Space Invaders, this time, though, without the little barriers to shoot through, but with much more movement in the ships and stuff. And so at this point, with the technology being what it is, a spaceship on a black background is pretty much what most of the games are going to be, because you can't really represent too much else. Remember, we're about to get the release of Pac-Man, which is also just sprites on a black background. Defender is going to be sprites on a black background, because the hardware just can't do anything else. That being said, the important thing here is, and like I said, if you listen to our AMOA special, Stern is not the only company moving from pinball into video games. But this entire idea of buying an existing game from Japan and just repackaging it, even though the board itself is coming from Japan, this is like the last gasp of that. Because the Japanese have realized there's so much money to be made, and setting up shop in the States is not all that expensive. They're going to be coming over. They're going to be distributing their own product. This is not going to last long, where the American companies can just pick and choose the best games from Japan and bring them over. Yeah. But it was an interesting thing, this Playmeter article, where they're really talking about, this gives us a leg up. We can get in fast. We can start doing this. And it just seemed very interesting that they thought, the only thing we need is to actually have the product. And Astro Invader is not going to be a big success. Berserk is going to be. It's huge, but it's innovative. It's not derivative. It's something different. And that's the important thing going forward. If you're not doing something different, you're going to get eaten up very quickly.
Lose to lose.
Exactly. Okay, that's it for 1980 because, well, we just did an entire extra episode on 1980, and you should just go over there and check that one out because that's really where the news is. There's going to be probably a few extra little stories trickling out over the next couple of months as the reports come out. I'm going to try to avoid repeating information from the AOMA show on our standard episodes, but some of the stuff will be interesting just to see what the consensus is from the reporters or industry analysts about, what will be successful, what won't be successful, and so forth. Let's turn on the time machine and head out to October of 1990.
For some of the hottest people around.
Mario Brothers 3.
You can't do that on an 8-bit system.
Welcome to October of 1990. Peter, what's our first story?
Sega launches Nintendon't ad campaign.
A $10 million blitz of Genesis does what Nintendon't will be hitting the airwaves after Labor Day. Michael Katz is betting that the over-18 market will find the aggressive, star-studded ad campaign appealing and help them make the jump from 8 to 16 bits.
Well, opinion or not, it truly was funny.
Well, I mean, this was the big change. This was the dawn of the Sega Attitude era, and obviously, we have our two-part interview with Michael Katz. I do recommend going back and checking it out because it is very interesting to hear his thoughts on this. And especially after he had also done very aggressive advertising for Coleco back in the day.
Yeah, it's kind of his thing, isn't it?
Basically, yes. It's all about figuring out how to place the product and target a very specific audience.
Yeah.
And that's really what he was doing here. He knew he wasn't going to be able to get the kiddie market away from Nintendo. His product was too expensive or more expensive, and he didn't have the developer support. But what he did have was a bunch of arcade games, and he spent money on licenses to make things seem more adult. He went for the sports stars. He went for Michael Jackson. He went for attitude. And Genesis does what Nintendon't is the culmination of that.
Yeah.
And this, I think, one of my driving reasons to do this podcast, to set things into a historical background, really is that I'm always a little ticked off when people talk about Sega Genesis versus Nintendo's SNES. Yeah, that becomes the conflict, but we can't forget that in 1990, Sega's going into their second Christmas in North America. Their third Christmas in Japan with the Mega Drive / Genesis. Counter or their opposition isn't the Super Nintendo. For these first 2 years, they are fighting the NES. And by the time the Super Nintendo shows up, it's been a couple of years. Okay? And this is something that cannot be forgotten from this original conflict, is just how big these time differences are. And think of how much 2 years in the video game business really represents. It's a lot of product. It's a lot of kids walking into the store going, oh, I wish I had that. it makes a huge difference. And it also explains why the Super Nintendo holds out a lot longer onto the 16-bit thing than the others, because it's not as old a console. I mean, by the time Sega moves on to 32-bit with the Saturn, it's already a 2-year older console than the Super Nintendo. And so that's, it's just one of those things. Understanding this life cycle is important, because I vividly remember these two Christmases where you went into the store and, there was the TurboGrafx 16, the Genesis, and then you looked at something on the NES and you're like, that looks like ass. And
well, this is true.
Yeah, and I mean, it was one of those situations where, okay, everybody already had the NES, and then you started hearing these rumors about a Super Nintendo, but it was still 2 years away. And you're like, you can't fault anybody for buying a Genesis at this point, even though, the game library wasn't always up to snuff. But that's another issue entirely.
NES era, I can totally see why Michael Katz does this ad campaign, this Sega does, Genesis does what Nintendon't, because Nintendo really didn't.
Exactly.
At this point.
And they could have pushed it. It's pretty clear from the record that the Super Nintendo was ready to go. And Nintendo was either just waiting for more software development time, or they just decided, you know what, the NES is still selling so well. Why would we cannibalize that market? Why would we bother? They probably could have pushed the Super Nintendo out a year earlier had they thought that the Genesis was really making true inroads. And that first year, they didn't. And even this second year, Katz, talks about how he failed to meet the unrealistic Japanese target just because it took a little while to get the whole thing up and running. And because they had to convince the retailers that, you have to stock this even though Nintendo might retaliate and all this stuff. It was just a situation where it took a while to get going. And then the Genesis will start to outsell the NES, and it will take a while before the Super Nintendo really makes inroads. And I think if the Super Nintendo had come out a little bit earlier, a lot of those people that bought the Genesis because they just didn't want to keep waiting for something new would have just bought the SNES. But it just took too long for the SNES to show up. And so Nintendo ends up losing a lot of market share, doesn't have the jump that it really probably should have coming off the NES. And establishes a second player in the U.S. console market when it really wasn't necessary for that to happen. Yeah. Hindsight's 2020. Speaking of competition.
As always. Speaking of competition in Spooktober, Splatterhouse to make Halloween debut on TG16.
One of the most iconic games for US TurboGrafx 16 players, the ultra-gory Splatterhouse, will be launching just before Halloween. The game would become a must-have for the system.
Okay.
Have you ever played Splatterhouse?
First of all, no, I haven't played Splatterhouse, and second, this is, I think, a horror game, and this is a genre I'm not particularly fond of.
It's not a horror game. It's not survival horror or anything. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up game.
Oh.
But
well, this is another genre I'm not particularly fond.
Yeah, but see, this was outstanding. It was originally an arcade game. It gets ported to the TurboGrafx 16. There's also a chibi version for the NES that was only released in Japan, which I highly recommend checking out because it's actually a lot of fun. But it uses a lot of imagery from splatter and gore films. I mean, your main character is this guy in looks like a janitor's jumpsuit, wearing a hockey mask. And you just get attacked by these demons and zombies and whatever else, and you're like hitting them with a baseball bat, and they go flying against the side wall.
Not a chainsaw?
I don't know if there's a chainsaw at any point. There might be. The game is tough as nails. I usually can't get past like the second or third level, but or at least I can't. I suck at these things. But the animation, the quality of the graphics, especially in stills, is just, for the time, unbelievably good, unbelievably gory, and it just showed that these new consoles were not targeting the kid-friendly Mario crowd.
Not at all.
No.
Rated M. Anyway. You know, our next topic is actually pretty funny to me because I actually did exactly what Nintendo didn't want me to do.
And what was that?
Well, calling each and every game console a Nintendo, but there's no such a thing as a Nintendo.
That's right. Nintendo is running ads to clarify that saying, quote, a Nintendo, end quote, is wrong, and that Nintendo, as in the Nintendo Entertainment System or Nintendo Power Magazine, is an adjective. They are worried about the name becoming generic like Xerox for photocopy.
Yeah, anyway, for me it was Nintendo.
Exactly. And just like in the generation before this, Atari had become, play the Atari. And it could have been an Intellivision or a ColecoVision, but most people just didn't care. It was an Atari. Nintendo here was starting to become a generic term for a console. So,
okay, why were they so against this? I mean, isn't this like a huge admiration of Nintendo?
No, because under U.S. law, Xerox lost this battle. And so,
right, exactly.
Yeah, see, under U.S. law, if a term becomes generic, remember, English is a language that, unlike most Western languages, does not have a central body that determines vocabulary and grammar rules. Okay, so for example, in Germany, we had the grammar reforms of the 90s, where literally the German government said, this is the new grammar rules and that's it. Spain has the Real Academia Castellana that can decide this is a proper word and this isn't a proper word. Yeah. France does this all the time too. English doesn't have this. Whatever is commonly used becomes a word. And so what happened with the Xerox story, and again, we're not going to go into all the details of it, the general idea. Places like, let's say, a gas station or a convenience store would post a sign saying Xerox copies here 5 cents. Now, the machine they were using was probably not a Xerox machine, but Xerox had become a generic term for a photocopy. And so you couldn't now force them to take down those signs unless they were using a Xerox machine because it had become generic.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, this is why, for example, they Rollerblade made a huge deal out of saying, no, they're called inline skates, not rollerblades, because rollerblade was about to become a generic term for an inline skate. Exactly. And once that happens, well, now your competitors can use your trademark on everything. And this is a huge, huge deal to make sure to preserve your trademark.
Okay. Got it.
And the important thing here is, this was not an ad run in normal video game magazines. This was an ad run in Plaything magazine, which was a trade magazine for the toy industry. They're saying, hey, you shop owner, hey, you distributor, make sure to train your people to use the right vocabulary, because if you guys start doing it, there's a better shot of our competitors winning this case in court.
Okay, got it. Makes sense.
Yeah, who knows? It might not just be used for game consoles. That's the transition to the next story.
Yes, just wondering. Anyhow, Duo FC is going to bridge the gap between PCs and consoles.
Duo Computers, a subsidiary of software maker Capstone, has announced the Duo FC, a PC compatible with a built-in NES that will be able to run both standard DOS software as well as NES carts. The machine will come in two variants, a $999 base model and a $1,899 model. The machine is being made without Nintendo's involvement, and all the NES hardware has been purchased on the open market.
Okay, so several questions.
Yes.
First, why the hell should I pay double for a model? So what was the additional value?
I believe one of them was a much slower PC. So it was basically like an XT and an AT model.
Okay, makes sense. And second, so they went to the store next door, this way around, bought some Nintendo's NES,
NES.
Bought NESs and built them into the machine.
Well, I doubt they went to the store next door, but they probably bought them wholesale. They didn't buy them retail, but they bought them wholesale.
Okay. And because once you bought it, you can use it because it's yours, this thing was not illegal. Am I right?
Well, that's another question entirely. So, in theory, they could do that if they were doing it for their own personal use. Now, I did try to find out whether or not this thing ever made it to market. There is a picture of it up on AtariHQ.com. There's a link in the show notes below. Remember, for all the stories that we're talking about, there's always links in the show notes. And there is a picture of it. It looks like a promo shot, something for an ad or for a flyer or something. I couldn't find any proof that this thing ever hit the market. I can very much imagine that Nintendo was not happy and that they tried to stop them or just tell them, hey guys, let this one go. Don't do this. Most likely, if they were going to fight it in court, they were going to say that the inclusion of the NES hardware was going to be sold as a tacit approval of the device by Nintendo.
Oh, okay. So
that's not something they wanted.
No. So they probably never got into the market.
As far as I can tell, no. They never made it into the market. And, I mean, the description of the machine doesn't really make a tremendous amount of sense other than you've got the signal being adjusted for the monitor or whatnot. But the curious thing is that a few years later, we will get a similar machine produced by Amstrad in Europe, the Mega PC, which is going to be a standard DOS box with a Sega Genesis built into it that outputs the signal not to a television set but to the monitor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why not?
Well, I mean, it just seemed like a good idea because you have then one machine that will play your games, but also will be able to be used for work stuff. And so I guess at the time it made a little bit of sense if you had a restricted amount of space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, probably not a hugely successful machine, but I remember seeing one in a department store here in Germany back in the day. That would have been probably 93 or something.
Okay. Yeah. Well, why not? Why not?
Exactly, but that was an officially licensed deal with Sega, so that does make it a little bit different.
Well, those times when emulators weren't, or when PCs weren't powerful enough to run emulators.
Not emulators for those systems, yes. Yeah. Commodore 64 was already emulated pretty well at that point, but pretty well. I mean, you could get some of the games running, but we're not going to talk about the ins and outs of getting exact emulation right, because that's like a holy war between the people who are like, oh, you can't play it because one of the frames in the middle isn't properly registered or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, anyhow, next topic, Microprose enters the NES market.
After the arcade release of F-15 Strike Eagle, Microprose is making the jump to consoles with ports of both Silent Service and Sid Meier's Pirates. Both titles will appear through Konami's Ultra label. And again, this is one where I have to say, go and check out the interview I did with Wild Bill Steely, where he told us that he had originally been approached by Nintendo to be one of the very first licensees to the NES way back in the mid-'80s. And he did not like the business model. That's why he turned down the offer for an NES license, thinking that paying for the cartridges up front and everything was just, too big of a risk. And now we're seeing that he is licensing two of the company's most prominent games to Konami for release.
I don't know, how did those games run on the NES? I really have problems picturing it.
Well, I mean, both of these games were originally designed for the Commodore 64. They were both controlled mainly by by joystick.
A joystick.
With the option of using the keyboard for some shortcuts. Silent Service, if memory serves me right, it's been a long time since I played Silent Service on a Commodore 64. A very long time. But if memory serves me right, you could do almost everything with the joystick, but some stuff went a little bit faster if you were also using the keyboard shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
Pirates uses a menu system with drop downs, and so you could control that whole thing with a one-button joystick. So in theory, the NES should be able to handle both of these titles without too much hassle.
At least to me, when I play a port of a game which was originally designed for being used with a mouse. And
No, not a mouse. Joystick.
Well, okay.
Remember, mice, when these two games come out, are really not penetrating the market yet. Silent Service predates Sid Meier's Pirates. So I'm guessing Silent Service is probably 85, 86. And this is where a quick jump over to Moby Games is going to give us the inside scoop. Now, Silent Service, if you aren't familiar with it, is an absolutely amazing World War II submarine simulation. 1985, actually. 1985 is Silent Service, and Pirates, I believe, is 87, if memory serves me right. 87, yes. So these are already fairly old games at this point. So the NES can handle them from a technical standpoint. Whether or not the conversions were any good, I can't tell you because I haven't played either one of them in these formats. A quick look here at the review scores that they got according to Moby Games. Pirates, Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it only 50 out of 100. But it looks there like, yeah, it just didn't appeal to the Twitch gamer types. And other magazines are like, yeah, okay, it's okay, but it's a little bit behind the times, which kind of makes sense. Oh, and it was actually ported by Rare, of all people, of all companies. So, Yeah, it's one of those games where it's hard for a traditional console gamer to really wrap their head around the nature of the game. But in its defense, when it was originally released on the Commodore 64, a lot of magazines dissed it. There's one famous, I believe it's Zap magazine, the big C64 magazine from the UK, just didn't know what to make of the game, and they really blasted it. And even Computer Gaming World, the old American magazine, were just like, I don't get it. They didn't understand this meandering around doing nothing game. And the problem is it was one of the first open world games ever. And you win the game by getting a high score, a good position at the end, but that requires you to make the decision when to retire as a pirate. Because every year that goes by, your character's getting older. And sooner or later, you're just not going to be winning those sword fights as easily as you used to. You're not going to be as convincing for your troops as you used to be. And you'll be like, well, if I retire now after just disbanding the last expedition, I've got this much money. I can buy a nice little bar in Barbados and, tell stories to my clients. But if I do one more job, maybe I'll have that big money and, be able to retire in style someplace with a plantation. And then, of course, you screw up. You go to prison. Your guys are able to ransom you a year later. Now you're really broke. Do you retire or do you try to keep going at the age of 45 as a pirate? And so on and so forth. Sorry. I could go on about pirates for a while. It's one of, if not the greatest game design in the world. It's just unbelievably amazing. And it still holds up today. I mean, it's been remade twice. Literally, not just, somebody else took the idea. It's been remade twice with very, very little in the way of alterations to the original game design. And just because it's that strong. And looking here at the reviews for Silent Service on the NES, it actually got very, very strong reviews in the 80s. A couple of people didn't care for it. Went down into the 70s, and even some Swedish magazine gave it a 60. But for the most part, very strong reviews. Again, it's one of those games where if you are open to a more open-ended strategic experience, it's phenomenal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So again, it's one of those games where if you really want to be able to say that you have an understanding of the history of gaming, and both of them are designs by Sid Meier, you have to have played Silent Service, you have to have played Pirates, you have to have played Civilization. They're just quintessential experiences.
Well, I can confirm this for Civilization. At least for the Civilization series. I've never played the first one. Okay. Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's
move on. Yes,
it's getting because we have more topics to cover.
A lot more topics. Yes.
Oh yes. EA enters Genesis market with a cross-platform promotion.
EA's entry into the 16-bit console market is with two ports of PC products, Budokan and Populous. They are coupling it with their Software for Life promotion, whereby owners of the PC versions can buy the Genesis port for just half price.
So I went to the store with my PC copy and showed it to the clerk, and they gave me the Genesis version for half.
No. You have to buy it directly from EA through their mail order. And you have to send them the proof of purchase of the original software. Now, obviously, if you're doing that through them, you're probably paying the price that it cost when it originally came out. So if you're buying the thing, 6 months later, probably not going to be full price anymore in the store. So you're actually going to be paying more. It's a great little gimmick, and they've been doing it on the PC side for a while already.
Yeah.
So let's say you bought the game on your Commodore 64 and now you upgrade to an Amiga. You buy the same software, the same program, but now for a higher end machine, and you got a discount when you did that. Yeah, it's an interesting little thing. I couldn't really find a lot of promotional material on it. I don't think it lasted very long, but it definitely was an interesting way to try to say, hey, this is just one big software family.
Okay. Bringing the family together.
Something.
By the way. Yes. All right. Let's move on. Because, as I said, way more topics. Activision settles suit with Magnavox.
The long-standing legal battle between Activision and Magnavox over infringement of Magnavox's patents in 11 of Activision's original game cartridges has finally come to an end. The patents stemming from Ralph Baer's work on the Magnavox Odyssey have been generating cash for years for the company. Most game makers simply ponied up the cash for a license, including Atari, but Activision stubbornly stuck to its guns. The suit has finally ended in a settlement, according to Video Games and Computer Entertainment magazine, with Activision being given 3 years to pay up what they owe. Activision will pay $150,000 a month for 3 years, followed by an undisclosed balloon payment in December of 1993.
Jeez, this is some serious cash.
It is some serious cash, and the Magnavox patents, they stem from that original work, and I don't even want to get into it because without some notes I'm probably going to get this wrong. But it had a lot to do with the interaction of objects on the screen. The idea of, the ball bouncing off of something else. So even if you've got, two hockey players shown through stick figures and the pucks going back and forth between them, basically that methodology of interactive elements on the screen is what has been patented. And so when Activision was originally founded, their argument to the court was that Atari paid a license. The hardware that allows for these sprite collision detections is built into the console. That's part of the CPU. So when you make software that runs on the console, you're not infringing on the patent. You're just using what is in the console, which they have already paid a license for. Therefore, the software maker shouldn't have to be paying this. And that argument has lost in court.
Yeah.
And so Activision has to pony up. Activision has to pay for this. And this is at a time when Activision is already hurting for cash. Remember, this is the Mediagenic era. They just overpaid for Infocom, as we talked about. And they really did not need this blow adding to their woes.
Might this be why Mediagenic kills Activision UK?
That would definitely be a factor, which is a wonderful transition. Very well done. So, Mediagenic, the renamed Activision, got hit with a massive damages claim in March arising from their loss of a patent suit against Magnavox. This has now led to massive cost-cutting in the firm, including the closure of their UK offices. The UK branch had been quite successful, launching a variety of arcade conversions for home computers, such as R-Type and Atomic RoboKid, as well as original designs like Hammerfist. The US head office has decided to concentrate just on their own games and prevalent platforms: DOS, NES, and some CD products. Commodore User Magazine reports that they had a yearly loss of nearly $20 million, and the damages from the lawsuit amounted to another $6 million. And so here we have a situation where we're getting some details about the repayment schedule from one magazine, other details from another magazine. The exact amount owed is never really known. It's a lot of speculation coming from these magazines. And the reality, though, is Activision is trying to recenter themselves. They're thinking that their money base is going to be the U.S. And they were actually making a profit in the UK and in the European market. They were doing decent. They weren't probably making a fortune, but there was no reason to close down a functioning, profitable operation for the sake of saying, ooh, we're going to concentrate on certain products. And that's what they're doing.
I mean, it makes sense to focus on what your expertise is in, so why not?
Well, yeah, the problem is their expertise has been basically to make products that nobody really wanted for a while now. And this is just... They were making good ports. R-Type was an excellent port. Granted, they got Manfred Trenz to produce the C64 version. But these were successful launches of product in a market that I think that the UK staff really understood the market. They knew what was going to sell, what wasn't going to sell. There was really no reason to dismantle that at this point.
Well, at least no reason that we know of.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But considering that Activision is going to go bankrupt and is going to get bought out of bankruptcy by Bobby Kotick in just a few short years, is sign that obviously the people who were making the decisions didn't know either.
Well, all right. Yeah, I can figure out a smooth transition. First reports are coming in from the Computer Entertainment Show in London. Hey,
and a clear trend is emerging. Yes. It's a lot of words. So a clear trend is emerging from the show. Consoles are coming. Europe is the last bastion of home computers as gaming platforms. But with the 8-bit systems dying, 16-bit computer adoption not as fast as one might hope, and Atari and Commodore both being less than healthy companies, there is a vacuum that Nintendo and Sega are happy to fill. So, a little bit of background. The Computer Entertainment Show just was a show that kept changing its name. I think the year before it was called the PC Show still, and so on and so forth. But this was the show in Europe that was the trade hub for computer game software. And at this show, for the first time, really, Nintendo and Sega are both coming out of the gates swinging, showing off a lot of new product and trying to convince people to move over to consoles from the home computers. And it's one of those transition moments. It's not going to happen immediately. It's still actually it's not going to be until the PlayStation really that this transition happens in Europe.
Yeah, I was just looking up when the PlayStation released. The first one was 1994.
Well, that's in Japan, 1994.
Yes.
North American launch in 95. I don't think Europe gets it until 96.
Yeah, but I think this finally made breakthrough for consoles.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the move away from cartridges meant that you could have budget lines of software, because the cartridge price was always going to be the big restriction in Europe. And also, because you had such a high penetration of home computers, it was hard to sell people on a console that was only marginally better than the home computers. And especially since most people didn't really invest a lot in software after the initial purchase of the machine. So if you're going to spend, let's say, £400 on an Amiga 500 and never have to buy another piece of software after that, and the Sega Genesis is going to cost you $200, but each game's going to put you back another £60, £70, that's going to add up really fast. And I'm just throwing numbers out here that's probably completely off, but those are expensive purchases, those individual games. And I think that when you went to the disc-based PlayStation, not only could it do 3D graphics like none of the home computers at the time really could, it also came on discs, so suddenly you could also, wait a year or two and suddenly you could buy a copy of Wipeout for £28 or something. And now the whole value proposition was something more tenable.
Well, why not stick to the old stuff up to the release of the PlayStation? Commodore Format magazine launches.
8 years after launching, the C64 gets a brand new magazine dedicated to its games. Commodore Format is launched with the cover story being the C64 GS console. Why launch a mag for an aging system at the same time that games like Wing Commander and systems like the Mega Drive and Neo Geo are on the market? Well, the system was still a favorite for those kids on a budget, and some of the best games were yet to come for the old bread bin. The magazine would run for 61 issues.
Was it a weekly or a monthly?
Monthly.
What, really? 61? 5 years?
Yep. So this is, and now granted, probably the last 6 months shouldn't have happened just because by then it was reduced to almost nothing, but it's very telling that the mascot character was the character that it was this kid with braces who was playing budget software. So re-releases of old games and stuff that you could pick up for £3 or £4 a pop.
Yeah.
On cassette. But it is a sign of just how popular this machine was, how much was still being done with the machine, and the fact that there was this very large user base out there that was still going to buy a magazine every month to see what was still coming out for the system.
Okay, so basically an advertisement magazine.
Well, I mean, any magazine that's reviewing products could be seen as advertising, but if they review the product and give it a bad score, it's not really a good advertising anymore, right?
All right, but if it's their own magazine, why should they give themselves bad scores?
Well, it's not a magazine run by Commodore.
Oh,
this is actually run by Future Publishing. This is actually a normal, everyday magazine. This was just another Commodore magazine out on newsstands.
Oh.
No. This is not a in-house mag. No. This was a proper independent commercial venture.
All right.
Yeah.
Just another case of why the hell. Anyhow, well, something coming out of Commodore's house, the C286, is that how you call that thing? LT?
Yeah, the C286 LT.
286.
Commodore seems determined to make it big in the professional computing market, launching their first proper DOS laptop, the C286 LT. This nice 3-kilo laptop is only 2 inches thick and sports a smart design. Still a bit pricey at £2,000, but not bad for the time. Except, of course, that it's just a rebadged Sanyo with a slightly better screen. New Computer Express, a weekly British computer mag, reported on the premiere of the machine in their October 4th issue and Sanyo's objections to the claims it was a Commodore design in their October 11th issue.
Mm-hmm.
So
what was this machine able to do except for running DOS?
Nothing. It was just a generic 286 DOS laptop. I mean, it was a very nicely designed one, and 3 kilos for the time for a laptop was actually very good.
Not too bad.
No. But the thing is that Commodore was trying to sell it as this is our next-gen system. And the fact that it was just a rebranded Sanyo was a sign of just how little money Commodore had invested in R&D, how far behind they were falling with R&D, and that they couldn't get anything off the ground themselves anymore.
All right. I'm just looking at the system specs, and I think they are not really that mind-blowing for the time. The thing I think is funny is that the CPU, which ran at 12.5 megahertz, you could slow it down to 8 megahertz. And now I'm asking you, except for power saving purposes, why should you slow down the CPU?
That has to do with the fact that back in those days, a lot of DOS programs did not try to cycle correct. So they would simply run at whatever speed they could get. Now, you have to remember, when the original IBM PC came out, they had basically this set-in-stone standard. And you would program to that, and you would try to take advantage of everything you could. So you wouldn't say, I want this many frames per second. You would just say, well, this is the speed of the processor. I'll just make it run really good at this speed. Once you increase the speed of the processor, suddenly the program is running at 50% faster than it should.
Okay.
Yeah. So in a lot of these machines back then, you'd sometimes see on the front of a desktop machine a turbo button or something. And what that would do is basically just throttle the CPU. So you could slow the CPU down or make it go faster depending on what the software needed.
I think I remember those.
Yeah,
I remember with such a button.
Yeah, and you needed it because, remember, the developer doesn't know what CPU you're going to use. And if they're going to put in an extra routine in the software that says, hey, if the CPU is going too fast, we want to slow it down, that's extra processing cycles that are going to really, really slow down your software. And if you're already on a slow machine, that just kills you.
Yeah.
And if you're on a faster machine, well, you might get an advantage out of it. But then you also have the problem that when you're writing the software, you don't know how fast the machines are going to get. So how much can you throttle this? What are you preparing for in the future? And this was one of those situations. There's a game coming up that we're going to be talking about that literally becomes unplayable a couple years after release because of this issue.
Makes sense. You know what else makes sense? After releasing all this old stuff, Commodore's profits plunge.
The company reported a drop in profits from $51.3 million to just $1.5 million in their last financial year. This despite sales in the UK increasing from £43 million to £75 million, and the number of Amigas sold in the territory inching close to the 500,000 mark. So, like I said before with the takeaways from the trade show in the UK, the 16-bit home computers still haven't reached the penetration that everybody was hoping they would. Now remember, the Amiga was originally launched in 85. The Atari ST was also launched in 85. So we're now 5 years in and they still haven't reached 500,000 sales in the UK. It's still increasing, and it's increasing quickly, but it's not moving at a speed that they really needed to. And it's a similar problem to what we discussed with the lack of internet, the lack of functionality. I mean, yeah, you had a Commodore 64 or a ZX Spectrum or an Amstrad CPC or an MSX and you played games on it, and the new systems play better games, but that's all they do. And even though you could do wonderful graphics and stuff, well, what do you do with a beautiful graphic that you drew in Deluxe Paint on your Amiga? You can save it to disk and show it to other people who have an Amiga. You can maybe release it as a demo, but you can't really print it. Nobody's got a decent color printer. You can't post it to the internet because there is no internet. It's just kind of on your computer, and you pat yourself on the back for doing a great job.
Which can be worth a lot.
As somebody who's spent an ungodly amount of time with both Deluxe Paint and the Shoot 'em Up construction kit on his Amiga and made some, in his opinion, wonderful games, I agree. But in practice, it's not going to get the masses really excited.
That's true.
And also remember, Commodore US is being bled dry by Irving Gould, and he's just using it as a piggy bank to finance his jet set lifestyle. So the company is basically being run into the ground, and anything that will make some scratch is being exploited. And they're still selling Commodore 64s like it's going out of style.
Well, it was going out of style.
The C64 never goes out of style. It is still stylish to this day, sir. I will have you know.
Moving on. What you see is what you play. Ads for Wing Commander hit magazines.
An ad campaign that really changed the world gets its first big rollout this month. Wing Commander shows off its graphical splendor with the slogan, "What you see is what you play." Now, it wasn't 100% accurate, as the main image was from the game's cover and was not completely representative of the in-game graphics. But unlike many games of the time, it showed a ton of screenshots and really made you salivate to try it out. And if you click on the actual image in the links in the show notes, this ad campaign, it's going to get a couple of slight variations over the next year or so, with more specs. Recommended specs are going to be added to it later on. But those screenshots, the detail, the beauty of those is what is in the game. And this is something that if you scroll through the magazines of the time, it's extremely seldom that a game is actually showing off a lot of screenshots. There's a huge focus on hand-drawn cover art. There's a huge focus on single screens that are just sort of cutscene type things. And it's almost like they're avoiding the screenshots as much as possible. And this ad really just grabs you, especially if you were a kid at the time, and you're looking at it going, this can't possibly be what the game looks like. And sure enough, that's what the game looked like. And it was extremely impressive.
Earth-shattering stereo sound surrounds you with realism.
Dude, that is a statement that cannot... The first time... Now, you've probably never played Wing Commander 1, right?
I can't move on now, can I?
It's a yes or no question. It's okay if you haven't. I won't think less of you. Yes, I will. No. No. Okay.
Even less. Well, okay.
The game starts. So you've installed this game that requires literally a 386 to play properly. And remember, at this point, 386s are massively expensive machines that really almost nobody has. And when you first start it up, the first thing you see are these silhouettes of an orchestra. And they're tuning their instruments. And then the director of the orchestra, the conductor, lifts his arms, they all go quiet, and then they zoom in towards you with a sprite scaling technique. And this orchestral music starts with the Origin logo. I had never seen anything even close to that on a computer in my life. And the fact that it was in stereo sound, the fact that it was scaling so smoothly. The fact that it was 256 color graphics. This was something whole new level. This even made arcade games look pathetic. And we've talked about that a few times on the show, that you went to the arcade because it was always at least a generation or two ahead of what you had at the home. And suddenly you've got something that even the arcades can't pull off. It was revolutionary. It's also the game that starts the constant, I need to upgrade my PC to play games, which wasn't a factor up until now. But every time a new Origin game comes out after this point, it's pretty much them for the next 3 or 4 years pushing the limits.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Well, my best buddy at the time, Danilo, he actually dropped around $3,000 at the time on the machine, on his first DOS machine, and he literally just walked in with the ad for Wing Commander, pointed at the recommended specs at the bottom and said, "This is what I want." And it cost him $3,000.
Okay. Well, why not?
All I'm saying is you don't get the PC master race without Wing Commander.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Now that I say it like that, it's a really bad thing. Okay.
Moving on. MSX. MSX, the third or fourth, announced.
The Japanese computing standard, MSX, has been around since 1983 and has seen 3 major iterations: MSX, MSX2, and MSX2+. Finally, the 8-bit standard is due for a 16-bit overhaul with MSX3. The initial specs look promising with a new Z80-compatible 16-bit CPU, the R300, running at 16 MHz and a built-in sound synthesizer chip, but it will ultimately be delayed, features stripped out, and never make it to market. The spec-down version would be released as the MSX Turbo R, with the last MSX manufacturer, Panasonic, ditching future plans for the line to concentrate on the 3DO. So,
yeah, you could have talked Japanese right now.
Okay, so again, this goes towards what we're probably going to see, what we're going to see in the next few months with the VIC-20 launch in the US in our 40-year jump. That whole 8-bit generation of home computers, basically the gaming computers of the early 80s, they're all coming to an end now. This idea of you buy a keyboard that's got all the components in it, you plug it into your TV, it's got joystick ports, and you play games on it and maybe do some other stuff that may or may not look productive. Mm-hmm. That business model is dying. And we saw it now with Commodore. Just even though the sales numbers are going up, they're just not going to survive. Atari, we've talked about it over the last few months. They're really not making it either anymore. Amstrad and Sinclair's already sold off to Amstrad, and the Sinclair line is basically just being cannibalized. The Amstrad system with the GX4000 and its computer derivatives are supposed to be an upgrade to the old Amstrad CPC line, but it's too little too late, and even Amstrad is making DOS compatibles. And in Asia, you still have the X68000 and a few other systems that are more or less these standalone computers, even if they're not keyboard centric. But the reality is this business model is no longer working. And the MSX standard, which was by far one of the most popular ones, is trying to hold on, and it's just not going to happen. And the MSX is important historically because a lot of big franchises start there. Metal Gear is originally an MSX title. Snatcher is originally an MSX title. MSX2, I should say. But that type of computer, that type of release has outlived its usefulness. You're either going to be moving to an upgradable DOS box, or you're going to be moving to a console. There's no in between.
Yeah.
So another one bites the dust.
Right, but I think this standardization is a good thing for the customer.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if we hadn't moved to this infinitely backwards compatible DOS/Windows world, you would have had these constant phases of stagnation, which is what you had back then, where Commodore 64 comes out. Now you're stuck with this hardware platform maybe for 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
And the slow incremental changes, the fact that suddenly a 3D accelerator company could come in and just say, hey, here, add this to your DOS box and let's see what happens. And suddenly you get quantum leaps in performance and a whole new paradigm where your CPU isn't really what's making the game work, and now it's the GPU and stuff.
Yeah.
Without that open architecture, we wouldn't have had the evolution that we had today. That what I was talking about earlier with that moment in 94, 95 when all the right hardware components are there, and to make the internet a viable option for the masses probably would not have come together had you needed a company like Commodore or Atari or even IBM to say, oh, these are the components that we're making standard in the computer right now.
Yep.
It just wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have gotten all of those components right, or they would have been so delayed that it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. So this was a good thing ultimately. The nostalgia for those old systems and the importance of those old systems to get us to that point cannot be understated. But ultimately, we needed those very generic VGA cards, the bitmap graphics where you're just generating an entire picture, putting in the buffer, and then throwing it to the screen, as opposed to syncing with the cathode ray gun so that you can minimize the amount of CPU time you need for processing sprites and stuff the way that you did on the Atari 2600 and the Commodore 64 and the Amiga and all these systems. Very important at the time. It made gaming in those machines possible, but ultimately it was holding us back because it did limit you on what you could and couldn't do. And that was just a discord into a different topic altogether that is eating up the precious time that we need to get through all of these stories, because we still have another jump after this. So please.
Let's move on.
Yes.
No one wants to publish the Black Crypt.
Computer Gaming World reports on a role-playing game in the vein of Dungeon Master by some college students from Wisconsin that made waves at Gen Con, but can't find a publisher. The game, The Black Crypt, would land at EA and be released on the Amiga. The students in question, the Raffle brothers, are going by the title Raven Software, a name that still to this day is a powerhouse developer with such hits as Hexen, Heretic, Star Trek Voyager Elite Force, Jedi Knight 2, and a ton of Call of Duties to their credits. Yeah. Huge developer, super important, and it was just when I ran across this little article that, hey, there's this great game and they just can't find a publisher. I was like, okay, I gotta run at least a little bit on it. And we may hear about Raven again in our next jump. Who knows? Spoiler.
We'll see. Up to then, Strider 2 is coming.
From US Gold, not Capcom. In a weird vestige of 80s licensing, US Gold has managed to secure the rights to make a sequel to Capcom's amazing arcade slash-and-run Strider. The team responsible for the original conversion, infamous Turd Factory Tiertex, will also be developing the sequel, which not only would get home computer ports, but also Genesis, Game Gear, and Master System ports. Does this story make any sense to you?
I take it as it is.
Okay. Well, and now if you're from the US, you're probably not going to quite understand this. But in Europe, the way that a lot of the licensing contracts for arcade conversions worked was that the computer software publisher would get the right to make a conversion and release a conversion of the game, but often they would also have a clause where they could try to make a sequel. So even if the arcade game didn't get a sequel, they could still make a sequel on their own. Now, this didn't happen all too often. Quite often, because if an arcade game really was successful, it wouldn't get its own sequel. But sometimes they would make these derivative games, or at least use the name of the game for a sequel. Strider was one of these. Another example was Renegade, which got 2 sequels that were home exclusive: Renegade 2, which was also known as Target Renegade, and Renegade 3, the final chapter. Then there was Outrun, got a European released sequel, Outrun Europa, which, again, US Gold garbage. And, I should also say Renegade 3 was unbelievably bad. Bomb Jack got a sequel, and there were several more. That I included a link to a Kim Justice video about this phenomenon, and she goes through a bunch of these really, really terrible spin-off games.
Yeah, they don't ring any bells, so...
Yeah, trust me, this was an era that you were too young to get, but yeah, the fact that Strider's getting this treatment is terrible, especially since the original Strider is a stone-cold classic. And yeah, it's hard to really explain what this world looked like, and we've talked a bit about it before, how they would just do these slap-shod, quick and dirty conversions and stuff, and a lot of the software that was coming out had little to no quality control. And I want to say Strider is one of the very, very last games that's going to be treated this way. And US Gold, when they port this over to consoles like the Genesis and the Game Gear, I don't know what the sales figures look like, but I can't imagine they were very good. And it must have cost them a lot of money. And it was probably a bit of a wake-up call that, you know what, we can't keep producing the same kind of stuff that we got away with on the home computers when we have the investment of console cartridges in play.
Okay.
That's all I got to say about that.
Then let's move on. Sega sells Time Out arcade chain.
Time Out, a chain with origins going back to 1971, has been in Sega's hands since 1987. But now they have sold it off to Edison Brothers, the same company that purchased the fledgling Dave & Buster's chain, as we reported on back in our January episode. Time Out would later be sold to Namco in 1996. So, what we're really seeing here is a further consolidation of the arcade operator scene, with fewer and fewer companies in this space at a time when there's a bit of a slump in the arcades, where the big hits just don't seem to be coming out of the arcades. The big hits are in the home. And so a lot of companies are just getting out of the business, and Edison Brothers, that runs shopping malls and the like, they think that they can really turn a profit off of this, and they're just trying to consolidate.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And of course, Edison Brothers very shortly after that is going to go broke, and that's why Namco ends up with the chain in 96.
Okay. Oh well.
Yeah.
Some things are going, some things are coming, such as the R360.
One of the most amazing and elusive arcade cabinets of all time is coming to an arcade that your friend's uncle once visited that you'll never get to soon. Launching with G-Lock, and with more games promised in the future, the machine which can spin players in any direction while piloting a jet plane will cost an estimated $90,000 and be something gamers around the world will drool over for decades to come.
Well, this is value added.
Yeah, no duh. Now, I honestly have only ever seen an R360 cabinet once in person. It was in an arcade in Las Vegas, and there was an out-of-order sign hanging on it. So I have never had the joy of actually piloting a jet plane in a 360 cab. But I have drooled over it literally for 30 years now, and would love to give it a try, but I pretty much have given up on that bucket list item.
Well, that's on there. Good things will happen soon.
Yeah. The 360, I mean, it was literally how much further can we push this? How much can we get out of the arcades? And, I mean, after the very successful Afterburner cabinet that had swaying forward and backward as well as left and right, and so many other cabinets. I believe the Galaxy Force 2 cabinet was also already out, which had a 360-degree rotation on its axis, as well as some tilting functions. They were just making this stuff more and more outlandish, but it just was too much and too expensive, and probably broke down way too often. So go for it. And also, they promised additional software to run on it. I was able to find a reference to 2 other games that were supposedly launched for it, and I think only one of them actually hit, but I couldn't find any confirmation that I was satisfied with for either one of those titles.
Okay.
So, alas, G-Lock was it, and G-Lock wasn't all that great of a game to begin with. Yeah. But, hey, you weren't playing it for the quality of the game. You were playing it so you could fly upside down for a couple of seconds.
Exactly.
Okay.
With all those simulator games, it's all the same. They're never really good. You just like to keep going around.
Something like that. Okay, but we are done with our 30-year jump. We are done with October of 1990. Let's turn on the time machine and jump to October of 2000.
As an industry, video gaming is bigger than Hollywood.
To electronic launch in history.
Welcome to October of 2000. Only get to do that 2 more times. So, Peter, what's our first story?
Nintendo finally decides on a name for its new console.
And that name is GameCube. Dolphin, the system's working title, has finally been dropped in favor of a very descriptive title that reflects the system's external design. Nintendo made the announcement at the Japanese Space World show in Tokyo, and first European demos were shown at ECTS. Interactivity with the Game Boy Advance is promised, as well as some pretty spectacular visuals. Will the 8-centimeter DVD discs, which won't be able to play movies, hold the system back? Or will it be that god-awful controller? Only time and sales figures will tell. And yes, Ethan, that was for you. It is a terrible controller.
Well, controversy.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I really like that they stick to a name that was pretty obvious.
Yes, that's true. The name really fit with the design aesthetic of the console, but it really just automatically pegged it as a younger skewing system.
Yeah,
no way around
that. But I can really picture they are on the reveal party for that thing, and maybe the name reveal party, and the guy went on the stage and was what was the name again?
Shigeru Miyamoto, or
exactly. The let's just call it GameCube. GameCube. Yes, GameCube.
I'm sure that there's video of the show, obviously, because it was at a Tokyo show. It wasn't Japanese, but yeah, I mean, okay, name one way or the other, shape one way or the other. The tech demos,
one way or the other.
Well, the tech demos looked really good, but the one big problem at both of the shows is that there's nothing playable.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that a lot of the negative press or any kind of negative press would have come out of people trying to get to grips with that controller, or in the alternative, people trying to play the launch titles, which from the few images I saw, they weren't really showing off Mario Sunshine. Instead, there's a lot more talk about Luigi's Mansion and so forth. So, I mean, yeah, the GameCube is not Nintendo's biggest success, but the technology is strong enough that it becomes the core of the Wii. So they basically get 2 generations of hardware out of it, which isn't all that shabby. And it could do quite a few really cool things, and it does end up giving us some amazing games like Rogue Squadron 2 and 3, and some Double Dash, Mario Kart Double Dash. I can't really complain too much about the system other than that terrible controller.
Yeah. However, was the first reception of the GameCube that bad?
It wasn't that bad. It's just it didn't launch with a traditional Mario game. And I mean, the N64 didn't launch with a traditional Mario game either, but it at least launched with a Mario game that used the conventional ideas of Mario, which is run around, jump, land on things, and instead it gave Mario a backpack, and he's spraying things with water, and it just confused people. And it also comes out well after the PlayStation 2. So the idea that you couldn't play DVDs off of it is a major bummer. And it seems to be targeting the younger audience. So the older audience, who are the early adopters usually, are turned off by it.
Okay.
And so that becomes a problem. And also that controller. I mean, if you are a guy my size, I mean, I'm 6'3". My palms, I don't have the longest fingers in the world, but I got big hands. That thing was a nightmare to hold. It really was uncomfortable as hell after about an hour or so. And the fact that it has a weird layout of the buttons, especially since you don't have, like on a PlayStation controller or an Xbox controller, shoulder buttons. It's got, I think, 2 analog shoulder buttons, and then on the right side it's got an extra button, and it's just this oddly shaped controller with no symmetry to the layout. And I think that just turned a lot of people off.
Well, it looked weird. That much I give you.
Yeah, I mean, it just didn't really look like a game console looked at that point in time. Now, granted, today we've got the Xbox Series X or whatever the big fancy version is going to be, and all it is a box. Both versions are just boxes. So, I mean, maybe it was ahead of its time. For context, we know what the new consoles look like. We don't have them yet. They're coming in a couple of months. And the big controversy online right now is that the PlayStation is gigantic and the Xbox looks like a cube, an elongated cube. And because of the pandemic, everybody's like, should we really be paying $500 for a new console right now with this many unemployed people? And those are the questions. So, but moving on, we've got tons to cover still.
Although the question rather is, and how can I get my hands onto one new console because they pre-launch and they're already sold out. Anyhow, Sony introduces GS Cube.
Cubes seem to be popular. The GS Cube from Sony is a system for real-time animation rendering composed of 16 linked PS2s. The system doesn't seem to have an actual purpose, even though there is a vague discussion of how it might allow for online streaming of video. The system would never make it to market, even though it was used to prototype the Final Fantasy movie. So yes, I honestly don't know what they were thinking here. I guess the idea was that you could make 3D movies in real time without having to pre-render stuff. But considering that making movies means designing the objects, putting in all the movements and the camera angles and the lighting, and then watching it, you're really just shortening the rendering time. It seems more like a tech demo or Sony's attempt to try to entice the animation companies to find a secondary use for the PlayStation 2 tech. I have no idea. But yeah, like I said, this thing never goes anywhere. But it did get coverage in all the major magazines at the time. And yeah. That's it. I got nothing else.
Okay. I mean, I think they just did it because they were able to do it.
That's true. And it cannot be overstated just how impressive the PlayStation 2 hardware was upon launch. It really was amazingly good looking.
All right. From Sony to Sega. Sega introduces Ed Barai.
Your pronunciation of that is as good as mine. So, Sega is still experimenting and looking online for the future. The Atbarai system is similar to the defunct DivX video disc system. You buy an Atbarai disc for a game for 1,000 yen, about $9, and can play the game for a limited time. And if you then want to unlock the rest of the game, you take your Dreamcast online and pay for the unlock code. The first title using this system was Eternal Arcadia. The last game would be 100 Swords, which was also the second game. So I guess first I need to ask if you remember what DivX was. Not the software encoding program, but the disk system.
Yeah, I don't know the disk system. I just know the software encoding.
Okay, so before the software encoding, video encoding, sorry, yes. Yeah. DivX was a short-lived attempt exclusive to the Circuit City chain of home electronics stores in the United States. And the discs were normal. They looked like normal DVD discs, except I think they had a different hue, maybe red. And they had been treated with a specific chemical. So you would go into the store and you could buy the DVD for essentially the price of a rental. I can't remember how much. So like maybe $5 or whatever, $7. You would take it home, and if you had a DivX player, you could watch the movie. Now, if you watch the movie and you never wanted to see it again, that's fine. The disc would self-destruct. Now, if you wanted to buy the movie after seeing it, thinking this was great, you could then take your DivX player online, have it connected to a phone line. Then you could transfer the money over, pay by credit card or whatever. And then it would do something to prevent the movie from self-destructing. Yeah, this worked terribly and was almost immediately discontinued. And its great surviving legacy is that there is a character on the Penny Arcade webcomic that is a pissed off, drunken DivX player with eyes and feet and legs. And by far my favorite character of that strip. And it doesn't get as much play as he used to, but he's basically just really ticked off DivX player hanging around and telling people that they're crap. So yeah, they're basically doing the same thing a few years later for the Dreamcast, and it's not going to work.
Well, but you really can't blame them for not trying. You know.
Yeah, I can. No, just kidding. No, I mean, I understand the impetus to do it, but the problem is that by linking this to physical product, you're opening yourself up to a ton of problems. You're opening yourself up to retailers being ticked off about it. Because remember, the retailer is being limited in how much money the retailer can get for the game. Remember, you're asking the retailer to sell the product, and then you're still going to get the bulk of the money later on. So the retailer, let's say the retailer gets to keep 50% or 40% of the sales price. Well, they're getting 40% of 1,000 yen, and then you sell the people the rest of the game for another 4,000 yen. As a retailer, I'm like, why are you wasting my valuable store space with this crap?
Exactly.
And this is really where the problem comes in. This is why DivX was only possible because it was an exclusive to one chain of stores. So they basically were like, well, we're also selling the players and everything else, okay. But this is just a bad idea from beginning to end, especially because they're losing market share like it's going out of style, and the PlayStation 2 is already launched in Japan by this point. So, oh well.
Let's stay with consoles for a while. Nintendo buys up Zelda.com.
The previous owners of the URL were in the business of entertaining adults. I'll leave the description there. How the Big N acquired the site is unclear, but based on the Internet Archive of the URL, sometime in mid-1999, the archivings of the site stopped and resumed again in the summer of 2000, at which time the site was telling very different stories about, quote, playing flutes, unquote. So, this is one of those things where we don't talk about it as much nowadays, but cyber squatting, where people would buy up websites that, even if, you could say, well, Zelda is just a woman's name, and you saying Zelda.com isn't necessarily directly linked. Get it? What I said there? Linked to the Nintendo franchise of games. It's still the number one thing you're going to be looking for when you're looking for Zelda. You're thinking Zelda.com. And so this was an attempt by Nintendo, and several other companies were doing this as well, trying to claw back the URLs that would be associated with their product. And this is really one of those moments where it's pre-Google taking over in 2000. So people don't have high quality search engines yet that are ubiquitous, whereas most people nowadays don't put in URLs. If they're looking for Zelda, they just type in Zelda into the URL parser at the top of their browser, and Google will then point them to the most appropriate Zelda link. But this isn't that version of the internet yet in the year 2000. So people are still very much like, oh, the word I'm looking for, .com, will get me what I want. And that's not going to last too much longer. But at this point, it's still something that a company like Nintendo is actively involved with and worrying about.
Understandable. Understandable. And I mean, also when your kid goes on the internet and looks for something related to that game, and they're ending up on an adult entertainment page.
As happened many, many times back then.
You think the guys who registered Zelda.com were really purposely going for being for selling the webpage to Nintendo?
Probably not, but they were definitely trying to get some traffic generated to the website because of the association. very clearly. Just like one of the other famous cases back then, I believe, was whitehouse.org. It was also a porn site. So
okay, whitehouse.org. Why not? Anyhow, moving on. Soldier of Fortune gets qualified as adult motion picture in British Columbia.
The controversial FPS game has been deemed too harmful to be sold without restrictions by officials in British Columbia, Canada. Now, only stores with a license to sell pornographic materials can stock the game in the territory. And this is one of those situations where they wanted to somehow stop the sale of the game, and the only law in the books referred to movies. So they decided to apply it to this game because it was producing these visual images.
Okay, because they're shooting people.
It's more than that. Soldier of Fortune was it went beyond just shooting people. It was a little bit more hardcore because you were a soldier of fortune, a mercenary, and you're killing people. And this is a Raven Software game. It's and they had the whole model where you could shoot them in different body parts, and they would have different reactions. And I think the storyline was that you were getting paid because you were a mercenary, and it was very, very realistic for the time. So realistic weapons and so on.
Yeah. Oh, what? Why not?
Hey, it seemed to work.
All right. In other news, or maybe the same news, Indianapolis tries to restrict violent video games.
A city ordinance in Indianapolis was passed to restrict the access of minors to violent and sexually explicit video games in arcades. Under the ordinance, games like House of the Dead and Mortal Kombat would have to be kept in locations that minors wouldn't be able to access unless a parent is with them at least 5 feet away. The ordinance would never come into effect, though, as the industry would successfully fight it in court as a restriction on First Amendment speech. Basically, they're trying to prevent kids from accessing these games in an arcade. And that's one of the key features here is that if you walk into the arcade, can you see it? Can you not see it? It would have forced the games into some kind of back area or cornered off area of the arcade.
And what is the First Amendment speech?
Oh, okay. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution ensures that the government cannot limit your ability to express an opinion. And that has been interpreted over the last 200 years or so to also include artistic expressions. So it's not just a statement of I like policy A or I like policy B, but, for example, if I write a story, then that is going to qualify because maybe I'm saying something in the story that's socially relevant. And so the government cannot limit my artistic expression.
Okay, artistic expression.
Well, because you can't really draw a line between where is artistic expression and where is political expression. An example of this would be, for example, George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Yeah.
At no time does it say, I think communism is bad. But it's an analogy, it's a fable that is getting that point across. So, because it's not expressing a direct political opinion, is it something that is protected from infringements on speech? Well, the original interpretation of the First Amendment was it's not protected. We're only protecting people engaged in political speech. Later on, and it didn't take very long, they said, no, we need to make this a much, much broader interpretation because otherwise we're going to start allowing censorship of all sorts of ideas that don't necessarily fall within this very formalized political speech scenario.
Okay. I have just one question. So, if this holds for that case, why did this case in British? Oh wait, wait, I'm mixing things up.
The case in British Columbia, number one, is happening in a different country.
Yeah.
And number two, what they are doing is they have labeled something as an adult-only material. Now, the differences in Canada, in England, even though they're common law territories, unlike the United States, they have official government censorship boards that label movies based on their age recommendations, if you will. And the United States doesn't have that. The United States has a voluntary system through the MPAA for the regulation or labeling of movies. They also have a voluntary system for video games known as the ESRB. And if you want to know more about the creation of that, go check out our interview with Joe Morici.
Yeah. No. Sorry. At 1 a.m. that I, for some reason, thought British Columbia was part of the US, but of course, this is wrong.
No problem. It is 1 o'clock in the morning as we're recording this, so that is perfectly reasonable confusion to have.
Exactly.
And to avoid further ones, let's go to the next story.
Let's just move on. Square pushes online hint system.
Square, makers of the Final Fantasy series, are putting pressure on Japanese magazines to not print walkthroughs for their latest RPG hit, Final Fantasy IX. According to Electronic Gaming Monthly, no major publication in the land of the rising sun has dared print a walkthrough for the game, as Square is trying to use the walkthrough on their new site, PlayOnline.com, as a way to get traffic to the site. PlayOnline.com is still around today as a community hub for Final Fantasy Online.
Well, why not?
Well, it is an interesting idea, and nobody really knew how important or unimportant websites were going to be for the future. So finding a use for the website, other than just as an advertisement or a place to put up a trailer or some images, was a real question people had in 2000. You just didn't know yet what was going to happen. And I think that this is a wonderful example about how a company that was very, very powerful is trying to figure that out. And traditionally, Japanese magazines were huge with the walkthroughs. The walkthroughs was one of the dominant things that you bought the magazines for. And even though official walkthrough guides were also a big business, this was a huge thing for the magazines. And Square sort of, maybe directly or tacitly threatening to withhold review copies in the future for other games and stuff, if they did do this, is number one, a power move. Number two, it really shows how important for them this online presence was going to be.
Yeah.
And the website still really looks designed in HTML2, maybe HTML3. I mean, it's a very, very old school design, even though they're still putting updates on the page, but it is the hub for FF Online.
Okay.
Which is still going, disturbingly enough. Long, long time after launch.
Never underestimate the fanboys.
Yeah, well, I mean, so many of these MMOs where you haven't heard from them in years are still running. It's kind of, at some point, and maybe by the time we get to the 10th anniversary, next month is our second anniversary of the show, but at some point when we get to the 10th anniversary, it'll be time to take a look back at the evolution of some of these to really see, okay, which ones are still around and stuff. It'll be an interesting It's an interesting idea. So I'm sure somebody's working on that as we speak.
Most likely. Anyhow, moving on. Unreal is coming to consoles.
Epic Games has announced that Unreal Tournament will be coming to the PS2 with a variety of improvements. These will mark the engine's jump from PC to consoles and help it become the juggernaut game engine it is today.
Oh yeah, sure. Without the consoles, it would have never been as big as it is.
Yeah, and also, I mean, don't forget the jump to cell phones.
Yeah.
But this entire idea that they're going to now make a console version of this engine really, really just explodes the possibilities for it, and I think is a watershed moment. And I just found this as a little side note story in Micromania magazine. And when I was reading it, I was like, holy crap, this is the moment things change. Because the Quake engine had, to my knowledge, not really been ported. Quake 2 got ported to the N64, but not really. I think they had to reprogram a lot of it from scratch. This is the first time that we get one of these major 3D engines from the PC ported over to a console platform. And the PlayStation 2 is important because, number one, it's a very, very complicated structure with dual CPUs and stuff. But also, it's going to hit so big and become so important in the marketplace that it's going to give Unreal a massive head start right out of the gate. Good on them.
BioWare developing Star Wars RPG.
What will cleanse the taste of Jar Jar that Episode 1 left behind? How about the makers of Baldur's Gate making a single-player Star Wars RPG set 4,000 years before the saga? Oh yeah, that's music to a gamer's ears.
KOTOR, is it?
This is KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic. And at this early stage, I mean, this is one of those stories that I found in almost every single magazine this month. Everybody was reporting on this. Just because it was such a huge deal. There's no notice yet. Is it going to be on console or just PC? A lot of people are wildly speculating, and it's clear that they're just pulling it out of their butts, that there's going to be using the Baldur's Gate engine, so it's going to be using that 2D engine. The fact that this game gets an Xbox release, the fact that this game is a full 3D engine, the fact that this game is using the 3rd edition D&D rules version of Star Wars RPG, these are all important factors, and these will add to making the game what it is. But the big thing, that whole decision tree that gets stored that alters the story slightly and creates either your good or evil character, that's going to be the hallmark of the BioWare games going forward, be it Mass Effect or Dragon Age, or even to a lesser extent Jade Empire, is, I mean, it all starts with KOTOR. So, yeah, the game is just phenomenal. It's awesome. And after Episode 1, we needed this so bad.
To think that I actually had a copy of KOTOR and I didn't play it because, it was one of those roleplay games where you don't need to react immediately. I thought I'd buy a new Jedi Academy or something just from the way the gameplay works. Oh well.
But did you end up playing it?
No, never. I just discovered it the other day when my parents told me to get rid of some stuff that's still in their house. I saw this, and it was I think 5 or 6 disc version, and one disc was missing.
Dude, just go on GOG, buy it there, install it, and play it. It is such a good game. Now, granted, I haven't played it since a couple years after it came out, but yeah, no. You have to play it. You simply have to. It's again, similar to games like Pirates. It's just one of those fundamental titles that everybody needs to have experienced. Yeah.
People say that. Anyhow, moving on. Looking Glass. Maybe dead, but Thief lives on.
After we talked about the death of developer Looking Glass last month, one of their more popular franchises, Thief, has been picked up by Eidos and will be continued by none other than Warren Spector. Spector is currently at developer Ion Storm and has just released the groundbreaking Deus Ex. Thief, Deadly Shadows wouldn't hit shelves until 2004, though. The Thief series, not something you're familiar with, I'm guessing?
Well, I haven't played it, but I know it exists.
Okay, that's already very positive. Thief, also known as the Dark Project, stealth first-person game in a sort of steampunk, not steampunk, but steam engine-powered Middle Ages fantasy setting. Very groundbreaking for the time. Personally, never really warmed up to it because I just don't like the first-person perspective, but Warren Spector is going to make something really cool out of the third game, and then there's going to be a fourth game years and years later that's not going to get very well reviewed, and that I think was the end of the series. But it is good to see that something from Looking Glass is going to survive going forward.
Going forward? I'm sorry, it's just super getting late, and I'm really trying to focus, but Lord.
No problem. Anyhow. We're almost through. Just power on through.
EA gets the Harry Potter license.
We talked back in our May episode how Warner Brothers had purchased the overall media license to the Harry Potter franchise, which included video games. Well, now Electronic Arts has gotten the go-ahead to make games based on the series. They would release games to accompany the movies, sometimes employing assets from the films, sometimes using more cartoonish imagery. The series would be a big hit for the next 11 years. Yeah. I wanted to do this really as a follow-up.
Sure.
Because we talked about how Nintendo had tried to acquire it, but then they wanted to sell all the rights in one bundle, and Warner Brothers basically is just passing it on to Electronic Arts at this point.
And I've played the Harry Potter games. Of course I did. And, well, I was always the age the protagonists were, so... Yeah, I am the Harry Potter generation. Anyhow, and I have to say, I really like this game. Well, the first, the second, and the third, and then I didn't like them anymore, but those 3 good games.
And you
at least
played them
so I thought by the
system?
time. Different systems, actually. Mostly PC, but Harry Potter 1 and 2 I also had for Game Boy Color.
And completely different game design, right?
Yeah, totally.
Well, and we talked about this a little bit before recording, but I'd love to have seen their contract and how they, what their restrictions were, what their liberties were with the franchise, how they had to account for development costs and royalty fees and so forth. It would be an interesting one just because it was such a long relationship that is now over. EA no longer has the license, and there's other developers making Harry Potter games. But whether or not it was one contract for all the movies, I mean, how do they really manage it in detail would be a fascinating thing to see. But unless we can figure out which executive was in charge of that and get an interview with them, I doubt we'll ever get an answer for that. Yeah. And speaking of licensing.
Yes. Diablo 2 goes D&D.
One of the weirder cross-promotion things of the era. A Diablo 2 miniature game based around D&D rules. The game was sold in both board game and software retailers. Nothing spectacular to write home about, but interesting nonetheless. Yeah, and I gotta say, this is right around the period. I remember seeing this, and I want to say it was right before 3rd edition came out. It was still under the D&D 2nd edition rules, but it was this weird moment because this is the period of the computer RPG renaissance. And we got all the BioWare games, not Neverwinter Nights, Icewind Dale, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. There's just a ton of RPGs coming out.
Yeah.
Super high quality product. And it kind of felt like there had to be a shift. Something was in the air where the traditional pen and paper had to adapt. And when I saw this in a Software Etc. store, I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. And no, they weren't kidding me. This was a thing that actually existed, and never played it myself. There's some reviews of it online. I included a link in the show notes. I mean, it very fairly forgettable, like most of these efforts were. But just encapsulating that moment when pen and paper thought, okay, I guess we have to learn something from the console, from the computer versions.
Mm-hmm. And
we don't have a company going broke this month.
Yeah.
So we have to close on a lighter note. Something happy.
You know, we really break with the tradition right now.
A tradition, yes. But hey, next month is our 2nd anniversary. So, you know, I thought...
2 companies going broke.
Hey, we did 2 companies going broke last month. So we're still up.
And I'm really angry about those guys. I mean, couldn't they one of them just hold on for another month? Anyhow, so now we need to close on a lighter ending. EGM Talks and I butchered this. EGM Talks fan translations.
Electronic Gaming Monthly discusses the rising trend of fan translations of Japanese games that are proliferating online. And this I just thought was cool because it's an article in a physical magazine talking about this, and it's a phenomenon that really could have only existed in the age of the internet with the rise of emulation.
Uh-huh.
Because we don't have things like I'm going to kill the name of it. It's not the EverCard. It's basically the rewritable RAM cards that you can put into consoles nowadays to play games that you download off the internet. You just didn't have it yet back then. This is all running through emulation, and it's people going into the source code and tearing it out and writing, translating the text, making sure it fits in there, which often requires a whole new set of coding or changing the code around. And sometimes they're just retranslating existing translations that were just terrible to begin with. A lot of the early Final Fantasy games, the English translations were just god-awful. So it's interesting that this phenomenon, which is still going strong today, I mean, it's still a huge, huge thing. And to all the people in the fan translation community, where is my fan translation of Shadowrun for the Mega CD? Okay? You only had one job. There's only one game I care about, and it's still not translated 20 plus years later. Come on, guys. You can do this. Shadowrun for the Mega CD, that's all I want. Okay.
I think your chances are pretty slim.
No, actually, somebody started doing it like a decade and a half ago, and then it's
and then you moved
out.
to Germany.
No. But the problem is these are massive projects sometimes, especially with the RPGs.
Yeah.
And, getting people to actually do it is tough. It is just very, very tough. And I greatly appreciate anybody who puts in that kind of time for that kind of a project. What I'm saying is, please, pretty please, do it for me. Thank you. Okay. Dude, I think that's the end of the show.
Yes, it is.
So, any final words of wisdom to our dear, dear listeners?
No, man, I'm absolutely selfish. I will go straight to bed and enjoy and tomorrow I enjoy hopefully nice weather at the Baltic Sea, riding a bicycle and just having a nice vacation. This is all I care about for this week. And next week, I'll be back. Life will have me back, and I'll deal with everything that comes next week.
Not too shabby. No. Yeah, and this is my last week before I start teaching classes again next week, and have to deal with
what I said.
and have to deal with the reality of whatever the U.S. election is going to bring. So, yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah, Tuesday, isn't it? Yeah. So, do you know when will we have the first? Well, when will we have a result?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the Supreme Court will probably decide it sometime mid-November.
But, okay, and when will we actually know who won the election?
Well, winning the election and becoming president are probably going to be two very different ball games this time around.
I think so.
But the problem is... we're not going to get into the politics of it too much, but there's several Republican governors who are going to try to pull a Jeb Bush 2000 whacking of democracy. So they're going to just try to throw out votes. They're going to invalidate whole areas, and we also have to consider the fact that there's going to be massive attempts at intimidation and or straight up firefights from militias attacking voting offices is a definite possibility.
This time? Yeah.
Yeah, and that will be used then by the governors as an excuse to close those polling places, and those people won't be able to vote.
Dude, do you think there will be staged militias moving on? Staged shootings?
Staged in the sense that they were told by the president already to keep a very good eye and be ready. So if you want to try to read between the lines like the good QAnon people do, then yes. I am not going to put it beyond them. And that will be then used as a political excuse to say we can't really count the votes. It's not a correct vote. So instead, I'm going to give it to the legislature, which is controlled by the Republicans because of gerrymandering, and I'll let them choose because they're representatives of the people.
It's going to be rioty month ahead of us.
It's going to be
not of us, but ahead of the Americans.
It's going to be an interesting time. What happens next?
We will.
It will be interesting.
It most definitely will be.
Exactly.
All right, man.
Dude, have fun. Don't do anything I want to do. We still need a secret word.
Secret word? Vote.
Done and done. Okay, everybody, remember, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. If you like what we do, send us $1 on Patreon. We got tons of early access stuff on there that you'll love. Some really, really great interviews. And yes, and we will see you back soon.
Exactly.
Have fun.
Bye.